And that brings us to the analysis of Brooks and Marcus. That is New York Times columnist David Brooks and Washington Post columnist Ruth Marcus. All right, you've been listening to all this analysis and at least an attempt to understand what we know so far. David, has the air been let out of the balloon? I mean, this has been building and building for more than 2 years, and here we have it, and now we're told no indictment.
Well, two immediate thoughts. One, this takes place in a political context where Donald Trump has been under attack and doing things that are norm-breaking for the past 2 years, and it has not broken his base of support. He's still at about 46%. And so the expectation or hope from some for the Mueller investigation, it would be the thing that changed the game, that actually seemed to break through out of the gridlock and did seem to do some fundamental damage to the Trump administration. I think with no indictments, that seems less likely. We'll argue about what's in the report. There will be things we'll learn, but whether we'll actually change the basic geometry of where our politics are right now, that seems less likely. Second, as Amy and John were talking, it occurred to me that Donald Trump has been bashing Mueller for the past 2 years. This may have been the luckiest pick he could have had. Because if it's Lawrence Walsh who did Iran-Contra or Ken Starr, that prosecution could have wandered off into a million different directions. And in a weird way, Mueller was disciplined, was defined, was focused, and it could have been Donald Trump's luckiest break.
How are you reading this in the early hours, Ruth Marcus?
Mueller and his 13 angry Democrats. I'm reading a little bit differently than David does. I do not think that air is out of the balloon. It is certainly, I think, good news for the president and particularly for those around him that there does not seem to be the round of indictments from Mueller that some people had been expecting before or after the election, possibly of his son, possibly of Jared Kushner. If that's not happening, even if there are going to be other referrals, that is good news for the president. But what could be really bad news for the president, and the reason the air is not out of the balloon, is exactly the kinds of facts that Amy was talking about. We have learned all along that Bob Mueller knows a lot more than the rest of us do about what happened here. So the facts contained in this report, which I believe is essential not just for the congressional oversight committees to see, but in as full a form as is legally and humanly possible for the American public to see. The facts will determine where this balloon is going.
Is it all about, David, or to what extent right now is it about what gets made public and what doesn't?
Yeah, I think it will get public. I mean, it'll get public eventually. As soon as it gets to X number of congressional Democrats, somehow it'll make it in the pages of my newspaper or Ruth's newspaper. And so why fight it? Why not just let it happen? Why have a fight about it then it gets made public? So I do think this will be made public. The precedent is there. The public support is there. The political motivation is there. So I do think that will happen. And the thing I'll be curious to learn is how shambolic was the Trump administration or the Trump campaign? I've always thought there was probably no collusion because there was no organized campaign within Trump world that could possibly collude. But we'll learn a lot more about the meetings. We'll probably learn more about the Trump alleged tower or projected tower in Moscow. It'll be interesting. It'll be like the best novel or the best nonfiction account of what the Trump campaign was actually like. And that, to me, will be maybe the most interesting thing. But I really don't think it's going to change the political dynamic of the country.
That's setting a high bar to say we're going to learn a lot about the inside of the Trump campaign. Is that, Ruth?
Well, one of the things that I think it's really important for us to remember is how much we know now that we did not know as a country before the election. We know that Donald Trump's son and his campaign chairman and son-in-law had a meeting with somebody who represented herself to be an emissary of the Russian government to peddle bad information about his opponent. We know that he, as he was denying it to the American people, was having his agents and emissaries negotiate to build Trump Tower Moscow. All sorts of things that, had people known, might have been relevant to them at the time, and that the American people were at the best misled about. And that he, by the way, then continued to dissemble about the Trump Tower meeting in New York and the building of Trump Tower Moscow. So shambolic or not, I think there's every prospect of having even more damaging facts come out.
So, David, that could add up. I mean, if we do indeed learn some, I don't know, seamy details or however you want to describe them about meetings that were arranged, phone calls, texts, messages, it could be a not so pretty picture.
No, for sure. And, you know, when Bob Woodward releases a book, it's also not so pretty picture. I'm talking about, will it change Republican
I'm going to get in trouble with Bob Woodward, but I would want to read the Mueller report over the Woodward book.
Yeah, no, the power to subpoena people is a better thing.
Sorry.
But Bob's pretty good.
Sorry, Bob.
Bob's pretty good. So we'll learn a lot. I'm just saying, will it change the Republican Party? Will it change Republican loyalty to him? That seems much less likely. I must say, I'm a little surprised there's nothing about obstruction of justice. There are no indictments there, or nothing coming down, because while I didn't think there was likelihood of collusion, just knowing the people involved and Trump's son, it did seem obstruction was very much within their capacity and within their inclination.
Well, you could have a lot of detail in this report, Ruth, about what was attempted. That it was, you could say, attempted obstruction.
Indeed,
we don't know.
and obstruction is a hard crime because it's a crime that requires you to be able to show very specific corrupt intent. But either way, the person we should be focused on and whose conduct we should be focused on is the conduct of the president. Now, maybe there are no indictments coming from Bob Mueller himself because he is following Justice Department guidelines and not indicting the president. But that raises the question, yes, but then we need to know the information that would have led him to indict the president had when I'm making this up, right? I mean, assuming if the president had been somebody else. But I think the more important thing is that even if he were not going to indict the president because he didn't think the evidence built up to that degree, because Donald Trump is the president, because this investigation has been about the president of the United States, even if the facts would not support indicting somebody else, doesn't mean they're not material and important for Congress to have and for the American people to have.
Let's come back to the political sea that we're swimming in right now, David. We are a couple of months into 2019. We're entering presidential contest. You were just saying you don't see this changing the support the president has among his own people. Does it have the potential, though, to shake things up in a bigger way?
It's possible, but the people we need to look out for are people like Larry Hogan, the potential Republican competitors to Donald Trump for the nomination. They've been sitting around waiting for this, frankly. And if it doesn't seem to be a slam dunk one way or another, they're much more likely to sit on the sidelines and decide not to run against him, decide he's invulnerable. And over the next, and we'll see what we learn, but if there are no indictments, that makes it more likely that he will not have a primary contender, challenger.
How do you see that?
The Trump base is so sticky and so loyal. We're back to shooting somebody on Fifth Avenue or obstructing justice on video in the middle of Fifth Avenue. So that will not shake them, but new facts could invigorate the Hogans of the world, could shake maybe some of the congressional support. And in fact, the reality is that these facts are now roadmaps for not just for other prosecutors, but for a Democratic-controlled House of Representatives that has oversight power. That's a way different world than giving this report to a Congress that's in total Republican hands.
And David, even with this out, as has been pointed out, we will still be waiting for the Southern District of New York and other prosecutors to do their work. Will that, do you think, have the feel of being the, I don't know, the albatross hanging over the administration that this has had, or not?
I mean, I'm told that those, I mean, it's public, that investigation has shepherds, have people who are within the Trump administration actively leading the way. So that's a much more dangerous set of investigations. On the political front, we don't know what speed they're moving at. And so we don't know if they'll be coming out in the middle of a Republican primary season, in the beginning, at the end. That's maximum peril for the Trump administration, the Republican Party, at potentially the worst time.
And we head into this election season, Ruth. I mean, we are just a couple of months away from the first Democratic debate. And as David said, some Republicans are trying to decide whether they're going to run against this.
Sure. And look, as with previous presidents, this is just a cloud that is going to, basically has hung over this administration from the get-go. And he has cried witch hunt, all the way along. And you can be sure that if there's any damaging things in this report, he will cry witch hunt again. I think which is a good moment for us.
But if there aren't, he may undo
he may
that
love
description.
Bob Mueller, you know. There's consistency is not the Donald Trump hallmark. I think it's really important for us to take this moment to pause and appreciate what didn't happen. At many points along the way, many people were very worried that Mueller would be fired, that Rosenstein would be fired, and somebody else would fire Mueller or constrain Mueller, overrule Mueller. That doesn't seem to have happened. That's a good thing. The thing that worries me is that we have also had a president of the United States for months now going after a duly constituted prosecutor, assailing him, calling him a witch hunt, suggesting that he shouldn't be in the job because he hasn't been elected to anything. Yeah. That's just wrong. That's the bad news part.
We've got days to look at this. Ruth Marcus, David Brooks, thank you.